Okay, so there's three different types of workplace conflict. You have your interpersonal. This is between individuals, okay? This could be like a disagreement between colleagues over project responsibilities or just a different working style, right? Personality conflicts are quite common in the workplace. Intra-group within a team. So interpersonal and intra-group kind of are very similar. But within a team, this could be two team members disagreeing on the best approach, right, to complete a project, or conflicts arising from unequal distribution of resources or responsibilities. And then you've got intergroup, and this is between teams within a company. So this could be something like conflict between the marketing and sales departments over campaign strategies or budget allocations. We see that sometimes. Dispute between product development and customer support teams. Okay, so there are three different types of workplace conflict. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to growing in this skill set as far as conflict resolution is to understand at work there's an expected behavior, right? There's expected conduct. So kind of when you're out in the world and you're in conflict, it can get quite escalated, right? There could be shouting, it could become very impassioned, there could even be, physical violence. That stuff isn't allowed in the workplace, right? If you are dealing with two employees in conflict, and one of them is screaming and shouting, that's actually a performance issue, right? You're not allowed to act that way at work. So conflict resolution is a little bit easier in the workplace because of that, right? Because there's a basic understanding of how we're supposed to conduct ourselves to each other, to our customers, every day at work. So there's common causes to conflict. And when you work through these, you'll realize most of these can be prevented, right? You can prevent conflict that happens in your company if you just improve certain processes, right? Or to improve your communication, or to make sure your processes are written down and the instructions are clear. So one of the main causes of conflict is going to be your lack of communication, right? Raise your hand if that's been a source of conflict for you, where someone does not communicate well. Yep, absolutely. Sometimes it requires you to adapt your communication style, right? I have a communication style that I can change a lot depending on who my audience is, right? So sometimes I'll just ask questions. If something isn't connecting, maybe I'll just choose to change how I'm communicating because it's going to work better for that person, right? So you need to make sure, especially as a manager, that you are promoting transparent communication. You should be having regular team meetings, regular one-on-ones with your staff, right? If you guys are working on a project, what are the steps of the project? When are things due? What are the expectations? When's the last time your employee handbook's been updated? Just so you know, there was a lot of legislative changes that went into effect January 1st. If your employee handbook has not been updated in the last 2 years, it's out of compliance. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind when you go back to work. Take a look at what your handbook states. You should be leading from those policies, okay? You also have your different personality types. This is where you need to make sure you're fostering an inclusive work environment, right? You need to be valuing diversity. With that, of course, will come conflict, but that type of conflict could really push your organization forward, right? Because not everyone shares the same view. And so we're going to try new things. But it's really important, especially as a supervisor, to understand who's on your team, right? You need to recruit for skill, but hire for fit, right? Who's here hired somebody who's like amazing on paper? Their resume is top notch. This is the person for the job. And then you put them on your team and they blow it apart, right? Been there. That's really challenging. This is sort of one of the things you need to be mindful of as a supervisor, if you are part of the recruiting process, is to understand what's the best fit for my team. Do I have too many type A? Do I need to hire another type A? Probably not. That might lead to some conflict. Okay, so that's something that you should be mindful of. What about ambiguous expectations, right? Where people don't understand what's expected of them, and then they're afraid to ask questions. You see that a little bit with Gen Z coming into the workplace, right? They want very clear directions from top to bottom, but sometimes won't ask or won't speak up if they are unsure. This could lead to some conflict, right? So make sure the goals and expectations are very clear. You should also have very detailed job descriptions, right? You should understand what's expected of you in your role. As a supervisor, this is also how you manage that employee, right? If you're scoring them like on an annual review, it should be based on exactly what's in that job description, okay? So same thing, if your job descriptions haven't been updated in a while, maybe that is something that you look into once you get back to work. Then you've got unclear or overlapping responsibilities, right? Maybe your org structure is too linear, and so you've got too many people that are equal to each other in responsibility, and no one's been designated maybe as the lead for the project. That can lead to conflict. No one knows who to go to maybe solve an issue. No one knows who to go to check on deadlines, where we're at with the project. So you need to make sure your roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, okay? What about an unfair distribution of resources? This can lead to a lot of conflict. I worked on a team once where this led to a lot of conflict for me personally. We used to work in the cruise industry, and depending on how well you did in my position that I worked, it was a sales position, you were then given higher grossing sales ships. What that meant is if you had one bad contract, you were never going to have another good contract because you were always sent to go work on ships that historically performed really low. That felt deeply unfair, right? Of course, these 10 people are killing it in sales. They're always scheduled to the best ship. They could do this in their sleep and make their sales target because the ships have been shown to perform that way. That was a source of major conflict on that team, right? What about differences in methods to complete the work, right? You've got two employees working on a project and they go about things very differently. That can be really challenging to work through. But you need to encourage collaboration, open discussion, and maybe provide some best practices of how we're going to go about this project. If the job requires a very specific process to complete it, that should be in writing. Right? These are the 10 steps we need you to take in doing this project. Make sure that is clear, that it's not ambiguous. Shared workspace issues. This is where you have employees that maybe have to share a workspace. This could be something as simple as a break room, or this could be a shared cubicle where they work different shifts and they share the same office space. So you just need to make sure you have clear guidelines and policies about what's the expectation of use for these shared workspaces, particularly if it's like a shared cubicle situation and you've got one employee that's really messy and one who's not. You may have to step in as a supervisor and create some boundaries and expectations of how do we share this workspace so we can compromise on, you might have to be okay with it being a little bit messy. You're going to need to clean up a little bit, right? How do we find that middle ground? Then you're also going to see conflicts with management. This can happen a lot when you have people that have been promoted from within, right? You go from peer to supervisor, and now overnight, your relationship with your coworkers has to change, which feels really awkward because now you've switched sides, right? Now you're the employer's agent, you work for the employer. There's a higher expectation of conduct, and sometimes that can be challenging for your peers to deal with. Right? Or you work for a manager that never shares their reasoning for why they make decisions. Employees disagree with it. Maybe as a supervisor, you just need to give your employees a little more information and context as to why certain decisions are being made so that they don't, fester on their own or create conflict that doesn't need to be there. So again, most conflict within the workplace can be avoided You just need to be diligent about establishing open communication. Make sure you clarify roles and then have your expectations clear. Again, with your employee handbook, this is a great tool for a supervisor to take the emotion out of managing humans, right? It's not personal, this is just the policy, it's in our handbook. My job is to enforce the policy. So again, this is why your handbook should be updated, because it is kind of the Bible, so to speak, for everyone in the company. One, it shows employees what's expected of them, what happens if they break a policy or do something wrong, like what can they expect to happen. As a company, this will outline your legal responsibilities to your employees, and there's quite a bit in the state of Washington. There are things that you have to provide your employees. And then again, as a supervisor, from your policy and your handbook, that's how you're going to lead your staff. You missed work 6 days this month. According to our policy, I have to write you up for attendance, right? It's not emotional, it's not personal, it's just our policy. So what are some of the early signs of conflict, right? You're going to see people, that tension and stress, or so to speak, the vibes are off, right? Anyone ever sat through a meeting where two employees are in conflict and it's super awkward? You can just feel the tension in the air. You can usually sense when there's conflict on a team. You'll see a decrease in productivity. One, because everyone's talking about the conflict, right? And trying to get various employees on their side. You also see negative body language, right? Do you have someone in a meeting that's, anytime another employee talks, they're rolling their eyes or sighing or crossing their arms, which in and of itself in a workplace is a performance issue that should be discussed with that employee, because that's just not how we conduct ourselves in a meeting. Even if you're in conflict, we aren't going to, perform that way. You'll see an increase in people not coming to work if there's conflict. And then, of course, frequent disagreements. So a lot of time wasted, a lot of energy spent on not the work that you're there to do, right? Mitigating conflict. So these are some strategies for de-escalation, and these work for any type of employee, right? Stay calm and composed. Of course, this is easier said than done, but again, in a workplace, this is the expectation. And I'm going to tell you from an HR perspective, if I have two employees in conflict and they come to me, right, and I'm getting their individual versions of the story, if one of them is super out of control with their emotions, probably won't believe them, right? They're not going to come across better in that situation. So if you are in conflict, if you're calm and composed, this helps you, specifically in the workplace, okay? So take some deep breaths to maintain your composure. Maybe you need to count to 10. If you're a supervisor, maybe you need to take even a day to prepare for a meeting or a conversation with employees, okay? Make sure you keep your tone of voice neutral and steady. This is a challenge, particularly if the person you're in conflict with at work is someone who drives you nuts, right? We all have that one coworker that's like, we work together, but we're never going to hang out outside of work, right? That can be really challenging to do. Or if you're a supervisor and you're trying to help de-escalate conflict, and one of the employees in the conflict is like your problem employee, same thing. It's hard. But you're gonna have to get yourself to an emotional neutral place. It's really important. You need to practice active listening. What is your eye contact? What's your body language? Right? Are your arms crossed? Are you huffing? Are you rolling your eyes? Or are you open? You making eye contact with who you're in conflict with or talking to, right? Avoid interrupting. Allow the speaker to finish their thoughts. Also, very challenging when you're in disagreement to avoid interrupting the other person. So if you're a supervisor, this is one of the ways that you lead that meeting, is you set the ground rules when the meeting starts. We're going to let each person speak their part of this. We're going to listen without interrupting. Everyone will get the opportunity to speak once we're done. And then repeat, oh, I got my first typo. Repeat back, that's supposed to be a B. Repeat back to clarify your understanding of what has been said, right? So just to clarify, you believe this is what's occurring, da-da-da-da, right? You want to repeat it back just to make sure you can confirm your understanding. Because again, most conflict is coming from a place because we're misunderstanding each other or there's a lack of communication. Sometimes in that moment of when you're repeating back to clarify, you figured it out right there. Oh, I completely misunderstood what you were trying to do here. That's on me, sorry. Okay? Communicate openly and clearly. So you're going to want to use the I statements, right? So if you're working on a group project and one of your teammates is always late on their deadline, one of the ways you might bring that up is, I feel concerned when deadlines are missed, rather than you always miss your deadlines, right? That feels accusatory, that second one. Okay, so you're going to have to understand the way you want to communicate the conflicts. Make sure that you're not being accusatory or inflaming it any further. Be concise and to the point to avoid confusion. Okay? And again, ensure your nonverbal communication aligns with your words. Who here has gotten an apology that was disingenuous, right? Because their body language didn't match their words. Right? Make sure it matches what you're saying. It's really important. You're also going to want to focus on the issue and not the person. Again, this is harder to do when the person is one of those challenging personalities that kind of gives you grief all the time at work. You do need to identify the specific behaviors or actions that are problematic rather than criticizing the individual. Again, this is where your robust policies and procedures or your handbook are really helpful for a supervisor. Because again, I'm just going to identify the behaviors and actions that are problematic according to our policies. Has nothing, it's not about anything else but that. Okay? You also need to avoid bringing up past conflicts. This means if you're in conflict at work and it gets resolved, it truly should be. Right? You don't get to bring that up again. It's resolved. That also means if you're in a conflict resolution meeting and the meeting ends and it's resolved, you don't get to go back out and find your buddies on the team and tell them, now here's the new dirt. Right? It has to end. Okay? You need to find common ground. So ask questions to uncover underlying interests or priorities. Right? Highlight areas of agreement before discussing differences and work together to brainstorm solutions that satisfy both partners' needs. This is actually really hard to do in the moment. Finding common ground should be something you're working on daily. Are you working on creating a positive work environment where you're getting consistent, constructive feedback? You're recognizing your employees, where you're hiring for teamwork. That needs to be something that you're doing every day, because I'll tell you, when you're trying to do it in conflict, it's really hard. I don't want to find a common ground with you. I'm mad. We're in conflict. So this is something that you do need to be intentional about, just in building your workplace culture every single day. You need to keep in mind that all of this takes practice, right? Self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and then a solution-oriented mindset. So again, conflict at work, you should approach it as, we got other things to do. Let's solve this and move on. Okay? So conflict de-escalation for managers. Okay, so this is where you need to make sure you are clear in your expectations and your policies. Again, you're going to lead from your employee handbook. Everyone's going to understand their role, their responsibility, and the expectations. Everyone on your team. That is your job to make sure that is clear to them. Okay? You use your company policies or your employee handbook as a guide. Again, that takes the emotion out of things, right? And then regularly communicate and then reinforce these expectations, right? So if you've got a company handbook or company policy to enforce, do so. Okay? Be consistent, reinforce your expectations as you go along. You're going to want to create a supportive environment. Right? Do your employees feel good coming to work? Are they supportive? Is it inclusive? Are they valued and respected? Do they know that? Okay? And you can do this as employees, you do this for your peers as well. Do your peers know that you value and respect the work they do? Do you recognize that when they do a job well done? If they point out something that you did wrong, do you receive it well? That's also part of being a good teammate, right? You're going to want to foster a culture of positive recognition as well as constructive feedback. What this means is if someone makes a mistake, just tell them in the moment. Correct it, right? Don't let that fester. There's nothing worse, right? When you're, like, let's say you're going to do your annual review and your supervisor gives you a low score on something and you are surprised and you find out then and there that you've been performing poorly on this one area of your job for months and no one told you. It feels a bit embarrassing, right? You'd rather just be told. If you mess up, be told in the moment so it can be fixed. Again, when you are intentional about fostering that type of culture, it's really easy for employees to receive that sort of feedback because most of the time you're giving them positive recognition. So when you do have to correct them, right, it's okay, I can receive that because I know my boss is not out to get me. They're always seeing the good I do. So if I mess up, no problem. This also requires you, if you are a supervisor, to model that behavior. So if you mess up, admit it, right? If you don't know something, say, I don't know. Actually, let me get back to you. I'll find who has the answer and I'll get back to you, right? You also want to encourage open communication. So you should be fostering a culture where employees feel comfortable with their concerns and opinions, right? We have that type of culture at AI where we can really check each other. I mean, we really challenge each other all the time because the interpretation of HR law is actually quite gray. You'd think it'd be black and white, it's not. It's gray. And all the time in meetings, we'll really square up with each other on, I think you interpreted that incorrectly. But because we do it in a way that's supportive, those meetings are actually really encouraging because I know that my teammate is only questioning or calling me out because they're trying to get me to level up. That's who I want to work with. I want to work with people that want to be excellent and don't mind leveling each other up, right? You're going to have to mediate impartially. This is really hard, particularly if you're trying to mediate a conflict between two employees where one of them is your problem employee, right? But you do have to mediate this impartially. So you do have to approach the situation without bias or favoritism, right? You do need to listen to all parties involved and gather the facts before you can make any judgments. Okay? Provide training and resources. Maybe your employees need to be equipped with some tools and resources on how to manage conflicts. Maybe you help them expand that skill set so that the next time they're in conflict, they don't actually have to come to you. You watch them resolve it themselves. That strengthens the team bond and everyone just kind of moves forward. Address conflicts before they escalate. This is the biggest one here that we see supervisors, they let it fester, they don't address it as soon as it arises, and then it becomes a way bigger deal than it was at the beginning. So you want to make sure you address issues promptly before they escalate. And based on all of the causes that we talked about before, you may just realize, this conflict is because of me. I didn't communicate my expectations on this project. Let me clear this up for everyone, right? Maybe that conflict's happening because I need to do something different as a manager, okay? So take proactive steps. Are you huddling with your team? Are you rounding? Are you checking in? Are you aware of what the vibe is? Because quite often, by the time the conflict's made known to you verbally, it's gone on for quite some time. If you're paying attention, you might be able to pick up, there's something about the dynamics changed. Let me get into that. Why has that changed? And see if there's a conflict going on. And then you want to lead by example, right? Do you show empathy or patience? Do you have a willingness to find solutions, right? Do you admit when you're wrong? If you don't, I wouldn't expect your employees either, right? So you want to lead by example. Inspire your team by modeling the behaviors that you expect from them, right? So So this would be an example of a meeting where you're going to bring two employees together and you're going to de-escalate the conflict because they haven't been able to do it on their own. Okay, so first of all, you need to identify the cause. What is the cause of this conflict? Why are these two employees in conflict? Can I figure that out first? That may require you talking to other people on the team aside from just the two people in conflict. Were there any witnesses? Okay. Anyone that sits near their desk that is aware of maybe why the vibe is off? Do I need to talk to them as well? Then you need to assess the severity of the conflict. Because this leads into you deciding who needs to be involved. Does HR need to be involved? If the conflict has gone over into something where we're talking about harassment, discrimination, bullying, that's not something for you to handle. That goes right to HR. Okay? This is also why you need to be paying attention. In the state of Washington, if you're a supervisor, you are legally obligated, right? Meaning if you don't handle something correctly, such as discrimination, you can be personally sued. They can come after you personally, right? Outside of the company, you. This means if you are seeing something like harassment happening, go to HR right away. Move it up the chain, let them handle it. They can do an investigation. Your only job is to just make sure HR knows. Because again, as a supervisor, you are legally the employer's agent. If you know something in the court of law, your company also knows it, whether you've told them or not, okay? So after you decide who needs to be involved, let's say in this case, it's just gonna be the two employees that are in conflict, you're gonna schedule a meeting when everyone can attend. And then step 5, you're gonna wanna prepare for the discussion. This is something for me personally takes quite a bit of time. This is why I don't want conflict to escalate to the point where I have to do a meeting, because this requires a lot of energy and time for me personally to prepare for this. I'm a deeply emotional person. These type of conversations or meetings are very uncomfortable for me. So I have to mentally prepare, what are all the ways this could go off the rails or sideways? What is this person gonna say? How are they gonna react? I have to prepare for that. One, because I know, given my role in the company, I can't lose my composure, I can't misspeak, I have to really have it together. So I have to prepare quite a bit for this meeting. That includes any sort of proof, right? If there's a conflict going on with something and you've investigated and there's maybe some proof there that's gonna let you know maybe who's correct, you should come to the meeting with that as well. When you start the meeting, you wanna set the ground rules and the goals, right? Hey, Sally, you're gonna get a chance to speak fully. We're gonna hear you. We're not going to interrupt. Jim, you'll get a chance to do the same, but we're gonna treat each other with respect. The goal of this meeting is to find a solution. Once we've come to a solution, that means this conflict is done, right? It doesn't continue after this meeting. You're not gonna go to your friends or your colleagues and talk about it. We resolve it here in this office, and we're gonna get it taken care of and then we can be done. Then you're gonna have each participant describe the issue, right? Can they describe what the conflict is? Again, you might find right then and there, oh, there's just a simple misunderstanding of the project deadline. We clear that up, no more conflict, right? Have them identify the costs. Can they state the other's view, right? And sometimes when you're asking them to do that, you can kind of see maybe where this conflict is playing out because you've got one employee that is coming to the table with some emotional intelligence and a willingness to maybe change, and you've got one employee that's just not, right? And so when they're describing the other's issue, they're maybe a little snarky or condescending. That's now a performance issue with that person. That's not how we conduct ourselves, okay? Summarize the conflict and then brainstorm solutions, right? Collaboration or compromise are the two best ways to solve conflict at work. So that requires everyone's involvement, right? What do we think the solution is? Really ask for the participants' input here. Otherwise, it can come across as, as a supervisor, you're just sort of telling everyone what to do or maybe micromanaging. When you have them give their input, you already have their buy-in, right? Because they've been part of the solution. They've come up with the ideas of how are we going to solve this and move forward. You agree on a plan and a path forward. Okay, once we leave this office, this is what we're doing, right? Maybe that's even a timeline, right? If you're having conflict on a project between different teams or different employees, it might have to be really clear in writing. You know, this is due by this date. On this date, we will have a meeting. I mean, it has to be very clear going forward. Schedule a follow-up review, particularly to make sure that the conflict's really resolved. Again, the idea is once you leave this office, you're not to go to your friends or your colleagues around the water cooler and then like just continue to talk about our conflict. If that's happening, that person's now the issue. That's now a performance issue, and we're gonna deal with that directly. Right? So your employees really do have to come to conflict in the spirit of it gets resolved in this office and we don't bring it, it's done. If they can't do that, then that's going to continue to be an issue for them personally. You do want to close on a positive note, right? Even if the meeting went off the rails, you could at least, you know, thank you for spending the time with me today, right? Even if it's as simple as that, you want to close the meeting on a positive note. Then the most important thing as a manager, did you document it? Because if you didn't, it did not happen and it did not exist. This is a question I ask all the time in my job. Did you document it? No, okay, it didn't happen then, right? So an email recap is a great way to document. Email in a court of law is accepted, right? It's got the timestamp, it's got the date. This is a great way to document things. So you would send an email to both parties. Hey, Jim and Sally, just to recap what we talked about in today's meeting. Give a quick recap, you send it to both, and you also send to HR for their personnel files. Okay, that's how you document that. If you don't document things, even though we're like in an at-will state, everyone's like, oh, you can just terminate anyone for any reason. No, yes and no. It can't be for a discriminatory reason. So you have to be able to prove that, which means you still need to have documentation. So it is extremely important as a supervisor, particularly in conflict, to document it. Because if the conflict continues after that point, you usually will then know who the bad actor is, right? Who the one employee is still underperforming or having issues getting along with their colleagues, right? Now it's just a them conversation. We've resolved the conflict. You still seem to have an issue. Let's talk about that. So there's 5 different conflict resolution styles. So whenever you look up conflict resolution, you'll typically get these 5 different styles. The last 2 are really the only 2 that work in a organization or a workplace. And that's going to be compromising and collaboration. So compromise, this is an approach where both parties may need to make some concessions, right? We're just trying to reach a mutually acceptable solution. It does balance assertiveness and cooperation. We're just trying to find a fair middle ground, okay? The pros, it can quickly resolve conflicts and it can maintain relationships, ensuring both parties get something out of the agreement. One of the cons, though, is that it can result in suboptimal solutions, right? Because both parties may have to sacrifice something. Some important aspects of their positions, maybe potentially leaving both sides partially dissatisfied, right? It's most effective used when a conflict needs a quick resolution, right? Maybe we're working on a project with strict deadlines and we need to get the show on the road. Both parties need to be willing to give up something to reach the agreement, right? So an example would be, let's say Emma and Jake, 2 supervisors, have different approach to a team meeting that they're doing for both of their teams because they're on a shared project. Emma prefers like a really structured and predefined agenda. Jake prefers a more flexible approach, which allows for creativity, kind of spontaneous discussion. So essentially, Emma's kind of the micromanager, and Jake's on the other end of the spectrum. And now their 2 teams are working together to complete a shared project. Of course, Emma's team is used to working with her style, Jake's team is used to working with his style, and they have found their competing styles and meetings have resulted in really unproductive meetings, right? All of the staff are really annoyed. We keep having all these meetings, and it's a massive waste of time. Like, can this just be an email at this point? This is a huge waste of time. So Emma and Jake get together and are like, we need to figure this out because we got to get this project done in 2 weeks. And we've got 3 more team meetings in between now and then. How do we fix this, right? So they come together to compromise, and they've agreed that they're going to do a very structured meeting approach, leaving some time at the end for open dialogue. So Jake realizes, based on the deadlines and Emma being pretty good at micromanaging, he's gonna let her do that. You know, you can have this structured meeting, you can micromanage the deadlines. I'll be the supervisor that's going to push our team to find creative ways to meet that deadline. I'm going to push the open dialogue. We can compromise on the solution. After this project is done, going forward, you know, Jake's definitely going to go back to his normal style, but he's willing to compromise a little bit more because Emma's style is going to work a little bit best with getting this project across the finish line, right? So this would be an example of a compromising solution to a conflict. Your next style that you'll see, and this is our favorite way to de-escalate, and this is collaboration. And this is an approach characterized by joint efforts by both parties to reach a mutually beneficial solution, right? You know, are we supporting the mission and values of our company? We have that in common, so let's come to a solution that supports that, right? The collaboration, it does foster creativity, it strengthens relationships, it does leverage diverse perspectives. This is why this is the favorite way to resolve conflict. But it demands significant time, right? It can be a time waster if you let conflict fester for too long. It takes a lot of effort, emotional intelligence, right? Genuine openness to consider various viewpoints. So from a manager's perspective, this is time consuming, right? It's most effective when both parties share a common goal and are committed to achieving a resolution that satisfies everyone involved. So you can see they're very similar, collaboration and compromise. An example for collaboration with Alex and Taylor. So you have these two that are working on a shared project, right? Excuse me, they are in the shared office space, okay? Alex prefers it to be fairly quiet for the work that she does. Taylor actually has to have quite a few colleagues come to the shared workspace to bounce some ideas off of. And they have constant conflict over this, right? Alex thinks the area is super noisy, she can't concentrate. Taylor would really love for her to just get over it. Like we're not chatting about, you know, the Seahawks or the weather, we're actually discussing this project. And this is how we get ideas done. And so they're in conflict and it just isn't getting any better, right? They share a cubicle space, right? Their desks are near each other and the vibes are off. The rest of the team can feel the tension, right? They're not able to resolve it. So this is where their manager has stepped in and is like, hey, I can just tell you guys something's off. Let's fix this. What's the issue, right? So holds a meeting to discuss how do we collaborate in our issue here. And so Alex and Taylor finally come to an agreement on, you know, let's have quiet times during certain parts of the day, right? So this is when Alex is like, you know, in the mornings is when I really charge pretty hard, right? So if you could give me the quiet hours in the morning, that would really work for me. And Taylor's like, cool, yeah, I can do that because we want to get this project done, right? But in the last 2 hours of the day, you know, expect quite a few people at the desk, right? Because we're going to be discussing open ideas, we're going to be trying to brainstorm and move things forward, and we'd love for you to participate in that, right? So they needed to come to an agreement on what are we doing with our shared workspace, How are we moving this project forward? But also in that, learned a little bit about each other's personality types, right? They're going to treat each other differently after this, because they now understand each other a little bit better. This person's super social and needs those creative juices running by bouncing ideas off of each other. They might feel valued. I might make them feel valued as my peer if I turn to them maybe once or twice a day and say, hey, can I pick your brain on something real quick? Right? So that person, Alex, has also figured out, here's a way that I can work better with Taylor. This is something Taylor might need from me. Right? And Taylor's also figured out with Alex, oh, okay, I'm also probably a little hyper sometimes. Maybe I can just calm it down a little bit. Right? And so they're finding ways to collaborate together to move that project forward, to be in the same workspace and to not have their supervisor have to call a meeting ever again to talk about their shared cubicle workspace. So the last bit of this. So the key points when it comes to conflict for all employees, right? You're going to have to accept that it's just part of work. It's unavoidable, but it has to be dealt with. It can't be ignored. Sooner is better, okay? Find the root cause of the conflict. Then and there, you might be able to resolve or avoid future conflict, particularly in the workforce. Most of the time, conflict has arisen because there's communication or lack thereof. There's unclear expectations. Right? Something needs to maybe be in writing. You may need to be more training. Okay. Make sure you understand the expected behavior. Again, conflicts are different in the workplace because there is an expectation of behavior. I mean, if someone is flying off the handle and screaming, whether they're correct in why they're mad, that behavior has to also be dealt with because it's inappropriate in a professional setting. And then work on developing your emotional intelligence. Can you come to the table with, you know what, how do I can give something up. I don't mind compromising a little bit, but I just don't want this bad vibe in the environment. I don't want this tension. So let's find a solution, right? If you're the type of employee that comes to arguments that way and the other person isn't, that's now a them problem, right? They're eventually going to get managed out because you're just not a great team member, right? You could be maybe a bit cancerous to an organization if you're that type of personality. For those of you that are specifically in leadership positions, be diligent about building up a culture of trust and recognition, collaboration. You're going to want to model that behavior every single day, okay? Encourage employees to manage minor disagreements when appropriate, right? So if it's appropriate, can they handle this on their own? You have to remain impartial. You do have to give conflicting parties a chance to express themselves, and that alone might be all that is needed. Maybe a person just needs to be heard. They just need to vent it out in an appropriate fashion. Okay? You'd rather have them vent to you as a supervisor than to another peer around the water cooler, right? Because then that just festers, makes the problem continue. Be okay with seeking HR's help. Okay? Whoever in your company handles HR, whether that's an admin or a true HR person, reach out to them if you need some help with this or advice. I get those type of phone calls all the time. Hey, I have to have this meeting with these two employees. Can I just run past how I'm going to deal with this? Let me know what you think. Okay? And then just keep in mind that managing conflict, it's a developed skill, right? You get better at it the more you practice, but it is challenging. It's emotional. It's hard to do in the moment, but it does take a skill. So you have to practice it and get better. But yeah, any questions?
How do you practice the skill and keep yourself out of trouble?
Girl, that is easier said than done. Yeah, pretty hard. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think the ones that don't work so well. I'm curious what that means, what that is.
Competing?
Yeah.
That type of conflict would be like in a sales force where you create a healthy source of competition in order to increase kind of the final product. right? It's one of the reasons why we don't really talk about it, because it doesn't work very well in most environments. It typically would need to be collaboration or compromise, but competing would be something like that. Where the conflict is because we're trying to outsell each other, we're trying to outrank each other. And the company doesn't want us to not do that, because it increases the bottom line. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, so just to give you, I guess, maybe a little pitch on associated industries, is that's one of the reasons why people have memberships with us, is we bridge that gap for you, because HR is pretty scary, particularly in this state. And if you're not an HR professional, it's really easy to get it wrong, right? In your case, there does need to be one person that's designated as who's gonna handle HR duties. Depending on what you've been tasked with, though, it depends on how much involvement you can get in conflict resolution, right? Because these are your peers. Typically with an HR professional, this is why the job is hard. It's a bit of a lonely position, right? Because you are separate. You really can't have the same type of interpersonal relationships as other employees would, because you're going to be privy to things, you're going to know the secrets, and you just can't talk about those things. So it's really challenging when you're dealing with a small organization, you don't have HR, right? So that's what my company does, is we're that person that you call to say, hey, what do we do? I've got someone that needs to take maternity leave. What do we do? I have never dealt with that. And we would walk you through the steps of that. Yep. Any other questions?
You said there's a bunch of changes that went into effect January 1. What's the scariest one to you? What's the biggest change?
There's a lot of language around Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that has to be in your handbook, right? So that is a big one that changed that the state's paying attention to, right? So if you have a disgruntled employee that's done any research, that's the complaint they could make. And just so you know, with the EEOC or ESD or labor and industries, they make it really easy for employees to lodge complaints, right? So sometimes you will have employees that will use big language, like I'm going to the EEOC. Don't let that scare you. It's really easy to lodge a complaint. If your practices, if your policies and your handbook are up to date and compliant, you're good to go. Okay, so if they haven't been, you're welcome to come see me, and I have some solutions for that. Okay? I'll be around the rest of the day. I know I'm a little bit over time. I'll be around for the rest of the day. So you're welcome to come find me and we can chat through some things. Thanks so much for having me. I'll see you around.